we have Dr. Solange Ashby here on the show with us on IBLACKPHARAOH Radio and the Culture Show. Welcome to the show today. How are you?
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's get started and talk about how you got into Egyptology.
Yeah, so I get asked this question a lot because as far as I know, I'm the one Black American to have a PhD in Egyptology following Andreas Wood, who is unfortunately no longer in the field. So I was visiting my mom, who was living at that point in New Orleans, and walking around the French Quarter past a bookstore and saw Martin Bernal's Black Athena there in the display case. And I thought, wow, a goddess described as Black. I need to get this book and read it. So of course I devoured the entire book, and that just sent me off on a search for more knowledge about this subject. At that point, I was living in Oakland, California, and really fortunate to be able to access classes through the adult education arm at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley. And so I took a class in New Kingdom history, maybe, and then we coerced that teacher, Terry Moore at Berkeley, to teach us Middle Egyptian, the language of hieroglyphs. And I was hooked after that. So shortly thereafter, I applied at UC Berkeley and University of Chicago, and decided to start my doctoral studies at Chicago.
Wow, and that's very similar to myself. I got hooked with Ivan Van Sertima's book. They came before Columbus, and as well as Black Genesis by Robert Bauval. That was something that, and also this Black Athena book was also a big inspiration for me. Okay, so you're one of the few, obviously, that believes in the African, and talks about the African origins of ancient Egypt. How did you come to this conclusion of the African origins?
Somewhere toward my fourth year of study at University of Chicago, so we have to do 4 years of coursework before doing comprehensive exams and then proposing a dissertation topic. I stumbled upon, actually I was recommended by my advisor, Janet Johnson, to look at the prayer inscriptions at the Temple of Philae that's located at the southern border of Egypt and the northern border of Nubia. And as I was reading through this publication on the inscriptions, I noticed that a sizable number of them, up to almost 100, are authored by Nubians. And I didn't know anything about the Nubians. They're sort of really briefly referred to in most coursework, but there are no courses at University of Chicago about the Nubian culture, civilization, languages. And I remember asking Dr. Johnson, am I going to write myself out of the ability to get a job if I focus on the Nubians? And she actually encouraged me to go ahead and undertake this study, noting that the University of Chicago has an amazing collection of Nubian artifacts from their time doing excavations right before the building of the Aswan High Dam, which flooded all of Nubia. Yeah, so my focus on the Nubians led me to start looking even further south, because the Nubian priests and administrators that I wrote about were actually in the employ of rulers from the Kingdom of Merowe, so still further south in Sudan. And so I have continued on this self-education process, which is always looking for connections from the south. And so I'm studying the ancient kingdoms of Kush. I studied the ancient church language of Ethiopia, Ge'ez or Ethiopic. I'm looking at the cultures of South Sudan, and I'm always looking for connections there. And what I see is very, very early connections before pharaonic civilization even arose. There were polities, kingdoms arising in the Sudan. And to me, that indicates that this Egyptian civilization originates from Nubia or even further south.
Absolutely. And that's something I've spoke about in regards to Narmer Menes. They've been a lot of speculation, particularly, and I say speculation for the fact that there's not enough legitimate proof that Narmer was from Central Africa or somewhere around Sudan. But we do know that a lot of the artifacts that the Egyptians had as well, Nubians had very similar traditions. So that being said, when describing Sudan in Arabic, the name Sudan means land of the blacks. And that takes us back to ancient Egypt, which was called Kemet. Mm-hmm. Also refers to land of the blacks. Can you tell us about the term Kemet?
Yeah, so it comes from the original term Kem that means black. It indicates the color black, and that T ending comes on to make that word feminine, to mark it as a feminine word from the longer phrase Ta Kemet, so the land of the blacks. Mm-hmm. And so that is just purely referring to the color, and then we can extrapolate or decide, are we talking about the black earth, the soil that is dumped on the banks of the Nile as the river floods coming down out of the East African highlands? Is it referring to the people as black people on the land? Is it referring to the god and goddess Isis and Osiris, who are also described as black and sometimes portrayed with black skin? And Egyptologists like to say that this is meant to indicate that they are regenerative gods or gods of resurrection.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting you say that, because my title of my book is called I, Black Pharaoh. And a lot of people ask me, they say, hey, Emmanuel, if you know all the pharaohs are black, why did you put I, Black Pharaoh? And I said, well, black meant something to ancient Egyptians. Obviously, it meant to send it into the God form. Is that kind of what you mean by what they think this Kemet means, like something like God or royalty is what they refer to black as?
I wouldn't go that far. I was just looking at the biggest dictionary of Egyptian words is a German dictionary. And so I was looking in my sort of baby Egyptian dictionary, and it just said black land. And I thought, let me go to this Wörterbuch that will give, pages of description. And so what they say there is, first and foremost, it's the color black. But secondly, it means completion, like you have completed a work, or it could mean the sum of a mathematical problem. So again, completion, this is the total. So it's that kind of idea of black, of completion. But then further along in the definition, I see, of Isis as Set Kemet, a black woman, or of Osiris being equated to Kemet, which is a name of a goddess. I wasn't even aware of, but this is a goddess who is called black, just like the land itself is. So there's a lot of association between black, between completion, between ideas of divinity. And honestly, I've not done a lot of work on it, but it would be a really rich dissertation for someone to do.
Right. And you yourself, you're an African-American woman, and you're in the field of Egyptology, which is very, very rare. I don't know how our listeners out there know that. It is rare.
I'm the one.
You're the one. So how have you gotten any type of harsh feedback being in that Egyptology region, maybe even from the African-American community, and also from those in Egyptology?
I wouldn't say harsh feedback per se. Although I do have to say it's just lonely being the only Black person anywhere, right? And so I have been privy to conversations that were sort of bordering on racist. And as a new graduate student, I just didn't really feel like I had the power or the place to speak up about that. I've heard, you know, racist commentary on excavations that I've been on. And as a powerless graduate student, I mostly sort of was quiet and I just sort of powered on and did my work. That's really changing now that I have graduated and I can say what I would like to say. And so I participated in this trending hashtag of Black in the Ivory on Twitter and posted that as far as I know, I'm the only Black American with a PhD in Egyptology, and then a plea to please correct me if I'm wrong. I want to find my people. And so I got a lot of people who started following me because of that, which was good. But I also have yet to hear folks say, oh, wait, I know of another person. Having said that, though, I work with and we sort of rally together, collaborate, and support each other, a group of Black scholars who are in related fields. So Ethiopian archaeology, Nubian archaeology, Nubian Christianity, Africology. So we are a small but growing group, and we are forever sort of traveling social media and publications to find other Black scholars. I recently became aware of a young woman doing a dissertation at University of Toronto and was like, girl, you gotta come in with our group. So we are pulling together a group that's a support network, but we're also doing a lot of important work. And I recently collaborated with 4 other powerful Black women who are so close to getting their dissertation, so I will no longer be alone. But we wrote a letter to the principal Egyptological Association in the United States, calling on them to do better about diversity in terms of hiring faculty, in terms of presenting Egypt as an African civilization, in terms of getting young Black students into the field and facilitating them getting into field schools and taking part in excavations. And so it's just a huge undertaking, but it is beyond time for this to happen.
Absolutely. And it's funny that you say that. As a lot of Africanists, so to speak, or maybe even some would say Hebrew Israelites, or real extreme groups that do take trips to Egypt, and they sit there and they will debate with some of these scholars about this stuff. And that could have brought a lot of fear to why they don't want to allow so many African Americans to come and to be a part of Egyptology. But we're very excited that you're doing that, Dr. Ashby, because that's amazing that you're the first, you're the only one, maybe not the first. Andreas Wood,
I need to give a shout out to my brother, and he did his dissertation at Brown and specialized in demotic phase of Egyptian like I do as well. He's just chosen to do other things, but we're hoping to pull him back to collaborate with us.
That's good. That's awesome. We're here with Dr. Ashby on IBLACKPHARAOH Radio on the Culture Show. Now, also, can you tell me about some of the similarities? You mentioned Nubia. Can you tell me about some of the similarities between ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt with other African civilizations?
Yeah, so there are a lot of, or perhaps not so obvious, but divine kingship is definitely one. Where in Egypt, the pharaoh was considered to be a manifestation of the god Horus. And we see this in other African kingdoms. Certainly the staff of authority is held by the king. It's the was scepter in ancient Egypt, but we see that with Akan rulers up into the present, right? And we see that in Ethiopia as well. Priests are shown with this staff that looks very much like the Egyptian one with the forked bottom. So divine kingship, this staff of authority, a lot of gold, just because Africa is so rich in mineral wealth still. But we see the Egyptian kings, I'm thinking of Tutankhamun, that amazing gold burial, his sarcophagus. But we see that in other African kings as well, that there's just gold and their queens are dripping in gold. And then less obvious things like that wooden headrest that we see people buried with, and that we know that people actually used in ancient Egypt, we see elsewhere in Africa. So there are a lot of similarities, and I'm probably forgetting some, but we can very much understand the royal iconography in Egypt in terms of how kings and queens are depicted elsewhere in Africa, and that is a fruitful area for study.
Now, would you say, there's always been this argument between the African perspective of ancient Egypt, and then there's the Middle Eastern. Of course, there's the European one that existed as well, which has kind of got diluted and pushed into the Middle East, so to speak. So would you say Egypt, ancient Kemet, shared more traditions and values with other African nations than they did with the quote unquote Middle East? Or would they have like a fine mix because they're right there,
There was certainly a mix. I heard a scholar recently refer to Egypt as the New York of the ancient world, right? So like anybody who wanted to make it big would have headed to this very wealthy, very powerful cosmopolitan area that was steeped in ancient learning with libraries and scholars. And so it did end up having a very mixed population, but I will stress again that I am convinced that the origins of Egyptian civilization are African, and that you can still see that today when you visit Egypt. In the south, you see people who look like you and I, and they're definitely African people. Those are the Nubian people. And then further north in Cairo, the people are looking much more Arab, and those are much more descendants of the Arab invaders who came in 642 into Egypt. Absolutely. Even in the Pharaonic period, though, there was a lot of interaction with the ancient Near East, as we call it. There was a lot of trade, there was conquest back and forth, exchange of brides, although the Egyptian pharaohs never sent their daughters, they received daughters from other kingdoms in the ancient Near East. That was also happening to the south, further south into other areas of Africa. It's just less written about. And so the north, I think, is much more associated with the ancient Near East, and the south is the cradle and the heartland of the African people of ancient Egypt.
Now, in that being said, is there a racial tension there between Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt in this day because of the different cultures, obviously?
Yes. So I've been to Egypt, I think 5 times. And when I first went there, I wasn't really that aware of it. But in getting to know Nubians who live here in America, and then talking with Nubian people more in southern Egypt, and just my own experience, I mean, sitting in a fancy hotel in Aswan, and having people, both white tourists, because I mostly don't see Black folks when I'm there, white tourists and Arab Egyptians kind of looking at me like, what are you doing in this hotel? Like, they're not expecting people who look like me. Or sitting by the pool and seeing Nubian people who are serving as the wait staff or running around after the children of Arab Egyptians. And so there is definitely a division between who has power and money. That would be the Arab Egyptians, and control of the government, obviously. And then who is in the service sector. And so they were certainly not expecting to see me come strolling into this 5-star hotel in Nubia, because I have the face of someone who should be back in the kitchen cooking food or, you know, serving drinks.
Right. So we see that. We still see that racism existing even in Egypt today. What would you say was your favorite Egyptian dynasty?
Oh my God. Yeah, I saw that question and I thought, oh, I have to choose. That is such a hard choice, because I wrote my dissertation on the late period. And so it's already in the period when Greece and then Rome were dominating and ruling Egypt. So it's not exactly glorious, but there is this flourishing of cultural exchange and sort of a battle for the survival of traditional Egyptian culture under this foreign domination. I love the Old Kingdom. I wish I knew more about it. Those pharaohs were just fine brothers.
Right.
and it's such a glorious period of initial creation of the Egyptian state. Everything's bigger, including the pyramids at Giza. The statuary is just gorgeous. And this is where we can look at the earliest manifestations of Egyptian religion. Although, truth be told, that's already happening in the pre-dynastic period. So hard to choose.
I know. I really love the 18th dynasty. And I was telling Dr. Ashton this when I spoke to her. I really love Hatshepsut. My book actually is about Hatshepsut and Tutmosis III. I loved what they brought to Egypt when the restoration from that intermediate period after when the Hyksos invaded ancient Egypt, and they kind of brought it back, so to speak. So I really enjoyed that period particularly. Now,
absolutely, their artwork is also gorgeous. Yeah.
How does biblical studies fit into the realm of Egyptology?
So I would have two answers to that. Some of the earliest Egyptologists came from a background of being religious people who initially started, you know, looking for archaeological evidence of biblical stories, and having studied Semitic languages, Hebrew and Arabic. And so that happens early in Egyptology, and we can see like attempts to analyze the Egyptian language as a Semitic language. In fact, the Semitic languages, Hebrew, Arabic, Akkadian, Ugaritic, those are the only branch of this major African language family called Afro-Asiatic that extends off of the continent. And so it's an interesting sort of backwards way to try to attempt to understand the Egyptian language. What I would like to point out is that we have Kushite rulers who are mentioned in the Bible. The earliest one being Taharqa. The Kushite king from the 25th dynasty. In the Bible, he's called Tirhaka. But he's mentioned in 2 Kings, and I'm blanking on where that, and in Isaiah. And so you can see mention how he arrived with his troops to battle the Assyrians as they were trying to topple the kingdom of Judah. So he's mentioned there as a kind of savior of the kingdom of Judah. So that's in the Hebrew Bible. And then in the New Testament, we have a mention in Acts chapter 8, verses 26 to 40 of the Apostle Philip converting or teaching a man that he meets on the road between Jerusalem and Gaza, who turns out to be the treasurer of the Candace, Queen of the Ethiopians. And so whenever you see Ethiopia in this ancient context, they're talking about Cush, not the present day Ethiopia. And the Candace is the Kandaka. And so that's a title from the Meroitic language that refers to the Queen Mother in Cush. And if this man was treasurer, then he was a very powerful man, because this kingdom of Meroe had amazing gold resources. And he then would have been the person managing those for the ruling queen in Meroe.
And it's very interesting because I was recently studying that this is the Ethiopian eunuch you're referring to.
Yes.
And a lot of people do get that mixed up between modern day Ethiopia and ancient Ethiopia, which was considered to be Nubia, or modern day Sudan, which was like this rich land of gold. I was always interested in Imani Reyes as well. She was one of my favorite Nubian queens.
Yes. So powerful. Oh my gosh.
Yes, she was. Let's talk about the Greeks for a little bit. The Greeks wrote about these ancient Egyptians. They studied the ancient Egyptian culture, and they studied in their libraries many of these Greek scholars. Let's talk about some of the Greek perspective of ancient Egypt in describing the Egyptians, how they looked, and some of their traditional values.
Okay, yeah, great question. So I should just preface this by saying almost all of the terms that we use that I have been using for ancient Egypt, including the name Egypt itself, are Greek terms for what the actual Egyptian terms were, including referring to Nubians as Ethiopians, right? And so that Greek term means burnt face. And so what they were trying to describe is dark-skinned people. And so that's what they used for Nubia. But the Greeks being really latecomers to these powerful intellectual traditions, looked up to the Egyptians, looked back on the Egyptian like 2,000 years of written history before writing was even starting to be developed in Greece. I'm talking about 1500 BCE, 1200 BCE as the various very rudimentary beginnings of writing in Greece, whereas in Egypt, they had been writing since 3100 BCE. And so when the Greeks were looking at Egyptian, or just Egypt in general, they understood the civilization as ancient, as being steeped in wisdom, being a place of learning. So many Greek scholars journeyed to Egypt to study mathematics, to study science, to study medicine, to study religion really specifically. So they came as kind of newbies and to sort of drink up this wisdom. And we have Greek historians Strabo, Diodorus Siculus, Herodotus, who write history, sort of bragging about their journeys in Egypt and all of the amazing things that they learned. And they revere the sites of worship in ancient Egypt, and they see it as a portal to what they describe as the God's land, which is still further south from Egypt. And so now we can imagine they're talking about Cush, about Nubia, perhaps even up into the highlands of Ethiopia. And so very reverential. And then that changes when Alexander comes and conquers Egypt in the 4th century BCE, because then they are themselves a colonial power in this land of ancient learning, and that's never going to be a respectful interaction. That
makes sense. So from the perspective of Egyptology, okay, in early days, I'm not here to accuse anyone, but would you say there was somewhat of an attempt to separate Egypt from Africa in the study of Egyptology?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so George Reisner from Harvard University, his publications, you know, they're still foundational in the field, and I still need to access them to get at that original excavation data, but his just racism is just appalling. And he and Flinders Petrie and several others really were pushing the theory that the impetus for the development of this civilization was a migration of white people into this northeast corner of Africa, and that is how we started seeing this civilization arise. And so that is really an explicit attempt to sort of co-opt the glory of Egypt for white dynast. You know, that is just also fanciful. It's so racist. It's hard to really, I tend to just skip over that crap and try to get to what did they actually excavate. But yes, there was a concerted effort to claim Egypt, if you will.
Should the worldview consider ancient Kemet to be a part of Black history?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think more and more in the last 20 years, we see even some mainstream Egyptologists at primarily white institutions, more, I have to say, in Europe than in the United States, but seeking to understand these connections between Egypt and other areas of Africa. But of course, it is absolutely African history. And I say that like, yes, of course, while at the same time acknowledging that every single Egyptology department at universities, and there are 6 big ones here in the United States, including Chicago, Yale, UCLA, Berkeley, Brown, Harvard, I may have forgotten one. They all name their departments where Egyptology is studied: Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations, Near Eastern Studies. And so the attempt is still to understand Egypt as a Near Eastern civilization. And that can be done because, as I said, there are a lot of relations to the ancient Near East. There are a lot of relations with Greece, especially in the very late period. But that does not work and squashes inquiries into the origins of the Egyptian state. For that, we need to look south into the rest of Africa, and those connections continue to be present. My entire dissertation is talking about kings and queens from Merowe who were sending military troops, sending pounds, literally pounds and pounds of gold, sending priests and administrators to continue traditional worship at the Temple of Philae. And that's happening in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century AD. And so it's not something that goes away in Egyptian history, this connection to Africa.
So is that something you would like to see? Do you feel like the African context of Nile Valley civilization should be taught in the schools to our youth, to children growing up, not just of African descent, but of everyone?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Otherwise, you're telling a story that is missing its essential element. And that was, in fact, one of the demands that we sent in our letter to the American Research Center at Egypt, this Egyptological body in the United States, that we begin to understand Egypt in its African context. And so here I want to give a shout out to the organizers of the very first conference I participated in 2009 at Manchester University in England, organized by Sally Ann Ashton and Karen Excel, and called Egypt in its African Context. And this was just a groundbreaking conference, not only because of the way it framed the questions, but also the participants. At least half of the people attending this conference were Black, either African British, or from the rest of the African diaspora, including the United States. And that was revolutionary. I want to see more of that.
Wow, that's amazing. Shout out to Dr. Ashton. You know,
yes.
She's an amazing person, and she hooked up this interview. So shout out to her, definitely.
She's been doing the work. She continues to do the work.
Yes, she does. Yes, she does. Now, would you say, this is a different spin I wanted to throw at you. It's involved with the Nubians in Aswan, or the southern part of Egypt today. Would you say that they are knowledgeable, that they are the original people of Kemet?
Yes. Yes. So I have a funny scene from being the independent scholar. I don't know if many people know that the Temple of Philae that I studied is on an island in the center of the Nile River. So beautiful if you ever get a chance to go. But you arrive at a dock where all the boatmen are Nubian, and then you got to, haggle to get the right price to get over to the island. And I saw tourists, mainly white tourists, some Japanese tourists coming, getting charged exorbitant prices. And I just was like, I'm paying for this out of my own pocket. So I just sat there with the guys. And I said, look, I'm going for whatever. I had a set price that somebody had told me was a fair price, but was like 1/5 of what everyone else was paying. And I said, so I'm just gonna wait until somebody's gonna take me for that price. So I sit there with the guys, just, chit-chatting. And so they show me tattoos that they have on their forearms, and it's written in hieroglyphs. And they asked me, oh, can you read this? They're testing me to see if I'm the real deal. And so they have their names tattooed in hieroglyphs. They want to know if I recognize the hieroglyph for the Ankh sign. And then they say to me, we're the people who started this civilization. And I said, I know you are. And so they know it too. But as oppressed people, they're not in charge of running the museums, not even the Nubian Museum in Aswan.
Right.
But they know. And when I have been studying the descendant language, the living Nubian language called Nobin, it's interesting that the man who was teaching me that language would point out the connections to ancient Egyptian words and say, look, this is the word in Nobin. It's almost exactly the same, like Ankh, for example. Mm-hmm. And then it has all of these other powerful connotations. And so, yeah, they're well aware of their connection.
Wow. That is amazing. Thank you, Dr. Ashby, for being with us here on the Culture Show and IBLACKPHARAOH Radio. We greatly appreciate you. Any shout outs that you want to throw out there?
Yeah, can I plug a couple of things that I have forthcoming?
Yeah. Yes, okay. You can.
So you can find me at Twitter at Bumbaugh Solange, my former name. That's spelled Bumbaughh, and then Solange. My book has just been released. It's called Calling Out to Isis, The Enduring Nubian Presence at Philae, and that's available through Gorgias Press, Gorgias. And then I also want to give a shout out to a really exciting publication I have coming out in February of 2021, called the Routledge Companion to Black Women's Cultural Histories. It's edited by the fabulous Janelle Hobson, and she has an amazing group of primarily Black women scholars, including Annette Gordon-Reed, who are just writing about Black women's cultural histories. And my piece is about Kushite queens, priestesses, and goddesses.
Wow, that is amazing. I talked on the show last night, and I spoke about the strength of African women and what they've done. African women being the only women first women to rule, number one, and second being have been more African rulers than any other African women rulers than any other women rulers in the entire face of the planet.
Yes.
But it's something that our African women here in America need to know.
African women and African men.
Yes, yes, yes.
It's important that we reclaim this tradition of seeing women as the center of society, because we are the life givers. I want to give a plug for a friend of mine who's a birth worker from Zimbabwe, and she told me the name in her Shona language that they call girls, to refer to girls. I'm blanking on the word, but she told me it translated to mean creator. Wow. I just love that. When you come from a culture that tells young girls, you are a creator, this is your potential. It's so empowering, and we need more of that. We need to reclaim that tradition. Absolutely.
And Dr. Ashby asked also, please send us your contact info, because we want to send you one of our IBLACKPHARAOH shirts.
Oh, yay.
And we also want to send you the IBLACKPHARAOH novel as well.
Thank you so much.
So thank you so much for being on the show. We greatly appreciate you. And we'll be in contact soon about that curriculum that we talked about for the show.
Excellent. Thank you for having me on. This has been a real treat.
Thank you.
My dear friend, educator, and anti-racist activist Jane Elliott once said, "We've been lied to about the number of races there are in the world, when in fact that there is one race, the human race, that sprouted out of Africa thousands of years ago." Well, if you don't believe Jane, Kaba Kabane says, "For one to deny their African origin is like a fish saying, 'I live, but not in water.'" And that fish is saying that while he's in the water. Imagine that. But what if we don't believe Kaba or Jane? Well, Professor Louis Leakey, upon searching for the origins of humanity, he didn't stay very long in Europe, Asia, or America. He found himself in the Horn of Africa, where he claimed to find the first human remains. This has led to what they call the out of Africa theory. This is widely accepted in biology, science, and evolution. But what if you're like me and you don't believe in evolution? Well, the Bible tells us in the book of Genesis, the book of Exodus, and confirmed in the book of Daniel that ancient Egypt was the first world power and the first mega civilization. So whether you believe in science, biology, evolution, or creation, all roads lead back to Africa as the origin.